Welcome to Season 4 of the Willing Equine podcast, the podcast where we chat about all things horses and being the best horse people we can be for our horses. My name is Adele Shaw. I'm a certified behavior consultant, and my passion is for creating positive relationships between horses and people. Hey guys, welcome back to another TWE podcast episode. This episode is going to be fun and unique. This is actually a throwback to 2020 when I had Bex and Julia visiting me. We did an exclusive conversation / interview for the TWE Academy, but I've decided to release it on my podcast as a great follow-up to my last conversation that I had with Julia in the previous podcast episode. This particular episode is going to be about grief and shame in horsemanship and just talking about our past experiences and maybe how we've changed and how we feel about some of the things we used to do or didn't know in our previous time as a horse person. And I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. I'm interviewing Bex Tasker of Positively Together and Julia Alexander of Julia Alexander Counseling. So if you're interested in learning more about them, their bios will be in the show notes. Definitely check out their websites and to learn more about them and what they do and their professions. In the meantime, I do apologize for any kind of poor sounding audio. This was recorded in my house's living room and there was a little bit of an echo. So it's not the greatest for a podcast, but hopefully you can still have a lot of takeaway and it's beneficial to you and you can enjoy the episode.
So I think we should all introduce ourselves,
Okay.
just for the sake of the video and everybody who's watching. So I'm Adele Shaw, and you guys all know me, and I know you guys. And I run the Willing Equine, and I have too many horses, and I guess you could say that my profession is horse training, but I feel like it's so much more than that. And that's part of the reason we're all here is because it is so much more than that. It's so much more as far as building the relationships with our students and our clients and building community and helping people on their journey. Actually, I was talking to another trainer and they mentioned that they were a horsemanship mentor. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was a really good label, like a title if we were going to pick up a title. I feel like I'm more than just a horse trainer, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. So,
like that. Okay. Well, I'm Julia Alexander. That's my last name. And I'm a therapist. So I'm a social worker by trade. But in my previous life, I was an educator. And both of those things seem to go well together. Absolutely. So my area that I work in mostly is around trauma and how we all have a story, mm-hmm. right? We all have a story, and a lot of the times we try to separate parts of our story from ourselves, and this could happen within a day or it could happen within a lifetime. And so I work with people to own their stories. Yeah. Cool. And I also, I've been riding horses and have had horses in my life for a very, very long time, which is a part of my story. But how that's happened throughout is there's some shame there, and that's something that I've had to work through.
Yeah.
Taking my skills as a therapist and applying them to myself.
Yeah, it was a hard thing to do.
Yes.
It's one way thing to teach somebody else. And then it's a whole other thing to say, okay, this applies to me.
Right, to take your own advice. So since I've been learning about positive reinforcement, I'm just like blown away by all the overlaps with trauma work, with people, and how we create spaces for people to heal, mm-hmm. and animals. So it's very exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to be here.
And I'm Bex Tasker. So my business is called Positively Together. And similar to Adele, people say, but what do you do? And I always have this lost look up at the sky and ponder before I answer, because the easy answer that people will understand is that I'm a horse trainer, but really I'm a people teacher. Adele, you're talking about being a mentor, and I sort of feel that way too. I would almost say that I'm like, at times I feel like I'm delving into the world of therapy. Mm-hmm. on many levels between humans and their horses. So inspiring and educating humans. Yeah. The thing that I find myself, after all these years, becoming the most passionate about really is inspiring and educating the human side, because I feel like that is the way to reach the most horses. If I can train a horse and I can make their life as great as I can, but if I can inspire and educate a human, then every animal that they come into contact with for the rest of their lives is going to be affected. So that's a real driving force behind what I do, and yeah, what we're going to sort of talk about today is a big part of that for our students, isn't it? For our clients. So.
Yeah, so let's go back, Julia, to what you were talking about with just the shame around horsemanship and what we often, as we're going through our horsemanship journey, experience as we recognize maybe something we used to do isn't what we would do now, and how to move forward with that and to kind of be okay with it and compassionate towards ourselves and understand that, well, for me at least, I want to recognize that was valuable, because I can't be here unless I was there first. Like I had to start there to be here. Yeah. So that has been a major factor for me in being okay with everything I've done to horses in the past that now I would never want to do ever, unless it was a very serious situation. But and just how we just kind of want to talk to you about maybe what you might counsel somebody on as far as that goes.
Yeah. So I pull in a lot of Brene Brown's work, so I'm just channeling Brene.
Sounds
good. So I'm trained in her curriculum, which was really life-changing for me, because I was able to first start to define the difference between shame and guilt. So they're very different, and they have a different physiological presence in our bodies, and then they're also different because they predict different outcomes for us. So guilt is the feeling of I've done a bad thing, and it's actually really predictive in the research of an increase in changed behavior. So it's adaptive. It's a really adaptive feeling, and I think most of us have felt guilt, I got to work late and I feel bad about it, and so tomorrow I'm going to set my alarm earlier, whatever. Yeah. And that can be applied with anything. But shame is this visceral body feeling that there is something that's inside of me, a part of me that's bad. I did this thing, and so I am bad. And it's very different than guilt. It sits with us differently. And it actually, we live in a culture that uses shame often, right, to produce change. But what we see from the research is that it actually doesn't produce change. It produces an inward, right? So really we retreat inward, we get quiet, we don't talk about what we're feeling or what we're doing, right? And so we first really want to make that distinction between shame and guilt. And once we do, then we start to figure out, how do I identify shame in me, right? So when I think about, just to put myself out there in a vulnerable way, when I was 6, 7, I learned to engage with horses in a way that incorporated a lot of violence. And that was just what I learned. And I think throughout my life, that's come up for me in lots of different scenarios as this very visceral feeling, right? Of is there a part of me that's bad because of this thing?
Do you think that's increased by the age that you were at when these things were?
It's a really good question. I think probably. I think we do lots of things when we're young we don't have the answers to, and we are learning from the adults around us that are supposed to, protect us and keep us safe and, lead us in, the path that is healthy. And
perhaps we struggle, if we learn something at that young age, perhaps we struggle to disentangle that being who we are versus what's being taught to us, because we don't literally remember being taught it.
Yeah, I think
is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And I think for me, my story around trauma was really directly connected to what I was taught about how to engage with horses. It's really hard to disentangle that. So it's been really a beautiful experience for me that my healing has happened as I learn how to engage with horses in a more kind, compassionate way. That's helped to untangle my story too and help me own it in a different way. So your original question was about shame, and
I honestly didn't know the difference between shame and guilt, so that's huge for me to be able to separate, because there are things that I have done and ways I've acted towards my horses or throughout the rest of my life that there is that deep visceral shame.
Yes.
But then there's things like, shoot, I worked too late, or I was a little short-tempered with my kid tonight. That's more like a guilt.
Yes.
And I know I can do better and I can fix. And it's not me. I recognize that it's not me.
Yes.
It was an action and a choice at the time that I can change. That's different than identifying myself as I was or am this person, and I don't like that, and it makes me feel terrible about myself. Yeah.
Shame is this feeling that because something in me is wrong or bad, then I am less worthy of love and belonging, less worthy of connection with people. And that's the biggest fear is with shame, is that it will lead to disconnection, which we are.
So I'm picturing a scenario where we've done a particular thing that we feel guilt about.
Okay.
Is it therefore fair to say that in one individual, that action, like let's talk about, I don't know, we've smacked our one person might feel guilty about that and therefore do something different tomorrow because guilt produces change of behavior. Yep. Another person might internalize that as being something wrong with them and feel shame at that.
Yeah.
So it might be the same scenario, but it's a different way that we are responding to it.
Yes, because we bring all of ourselves to any relationship that we're in, even the relationship with our horses. So the person that feels guilt comes in with a different story.
So the healthier way to deal with something is to feel guilt over it rather than shame. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if we have resilience enough to say, I did this thing that I don't like, or I did this thing that I feel like is not a choice that I want to make again, or I was reactive.
Yes.
If we have enough resilience to say, that's not because I'm bad. There's not something inherent in me that's bad. We're much more likely to be able to move to something that feels better.
You know what's so cool about this, and it's not something I predicted when we started talking about this, is that all of us have done Dr. Susan Friedman's Living and Learning with Animals course, and Dr. Friedman talks a lot about labels and unlabel me, and labels being something which we are putting the blame into the inside of the animal. So the animal is dominant, and it's a vicious circle that has no end, versus seeing it as simply a behaviour that the animal is doing, which can therefore be influenced or changed.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yes, it's externalized, not internalized.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, and there's something about Dr. Susan Friedman that just really exudes kindness and compassion.
And peace.
Yes, and so, I'm not promoting people feel guilty, right? I don't want people to misunderstand.
Yes.
But it really is important because we all have those sensations come up in us that we really start to get, become detectives of our own bodies, right? And how we piece apart guilt and shame, because we do know that guilt can move us where shame really keeps us stuck.
Well, for me, because as you're talking, I'm just like thinking through, this helps me identify why some of the stuff in my past was that I'm still holding on to. I might even perform that same action now, but I don't hold on to it the same way because I'm not identifying myself as that person. And it was I don't know, it was an action at the time, and I'm like, okay, that was not what I wanted. Let's change that and do better. Whereas I look back at my past self and I almost identify my past self by those actions. And so I feel shame over that past self.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that way, that is interesting to me because it helps me identify why I'm more resilient now to, I guess that's the right word,
Yeah.
to a mistake I might make that might closely resemble something I might have done in the past. But they process different in me.
Yeah.
Thinking about past self versus, okay, even something I did in the last year, you know, it's more current self. I don't have any shame over that. Like, I'm like, well, it was a decision I made in the moment, wasn't the best one. And now that I know better, you know, all that. But then I look 10 years ago past me and I feel more shame over that.
So the question then is, how can those listening to this conversation make the same journey that Adele has? Because it's not simply past self, present self. You've gone through a process to reach this point.
Yes.
So what tools are there, or what, how can people make that journey?
Well, I mean, I can offer some ideas around shame resilience, but I wonder if it would be helpful to just share a little piece of what you feel like you've done.
Oh, I see. I don't even know if I know. Okay. So part of it is like I had no way to identify it. I just knew it kind of happens.
Right.
I think knowing that I'm constantly seeking to do better, but also understanding that there is no necessarily like, this is the absolute truth and this is the absolute right, because there was even a middle ground where I did have that sense of, I must do it this way for it to be absolutely right and true. And any slip up in that created more of a shame feeling.
Right.
Whereas now I'll do something I wouldn't necessarily promote or agree with. Like, I don't even agree with it and I just did it type thing.
Because you're human.
Because I'm human. I make a mistake, but I'm like, okay, that's part of the learning process. Like that was, I didn't set that up the way I wanted it to. You know, I take a step back and I start instantly, or even over time, it takes time to process through what caused that to happen.
Right.
But I don't identify myself as that mistake.
Right.
So
you know what I wonder too is that if part of the thing that helps is our own education about from the animal's perspective.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that I'm super interested in and passionate about is the transfer between the humans. So how concepts that we apply to our horses within behavioral science and learning theory and whatever applied to our horses, how that also applies to ourselves.
Yes.
But because you have become aware in the intervening period, you've become much more aware. Your fog has lifted, so to speak, around the science behind learning and about, you know, and in order to have the knowledge to train with positive reinforcement effectively or just to train effectively full stop, you've now got therefore you must have much more compassion for the animal and you must be looking at behavior, because labeling an animal, etc., isn't helpful and acting reactively in the moment isn't helpful, and you know this consciously now. Like I just wonder do you agree that maybe the learning about how to train the horse has helped you to be more compassionate to yourself?
Absolutely, because now I can recognize my own training.
Yeah.
Even if I'm applying it to myself. Like
shine the spotlight on you.
Yeah, there's not necessarily, it doesn't have to necessarily be like an external trainer, like somebody who's, you know, manipulating my behavior. I'm still learning and all of the science still applies. And because of the way we think, we can kind of retrospectively like, okay, analyze a situation and say, what can I do? Where was the reinforcing factor in that? You know, how was I set up? You know, was I set up for success? Was I not? What are the approximations I could take to the steps I can make to make that better next time?
Yeah.
Do I need help? Like I might need to find somebody to guide me through this. And like you mentioned also, it's a process, it's a journey. So when I first started recognizing all that science and all that, it was still super black and white, still very right versus wrong, very like this is how it should be versus, you know, and so, and then now my learning process is more of like, it's way more gray, like shades of gray. Like it's way, the science obviously is all still the same, but how it applies in a non-vacuum situation and to the individual learner and all that changes. And that gives me more grace too, more,
such a good word too.
Like more, I don't even like the ability to say, it's not as simple as this happened and you did right or you did wrong. There's more layers. There's more layers to the situation.
Yeah, it becomes more nuanced.
Yeah. And because of that nuance, I'm able to be okay with the fact that we may not have gotten it quite right that one time. You know, like what changed? What were the factors that made it not quite the way I wanted it to be that time versus I did right in that time or I did wrong in that time?
Well, one thing that you mentioned that I'll bring back to kind of the shame piece is that I think you alluded to the fact that you're not attempting to be perfect.
Yeah.
That there really isn't such a thing as perfect. And I think oftentimes when we're learning something new, it needs to be black and white for a little while so we can really integrate it. And that's okay. But I think that perfection and perfectionism is one of those things that is really a shield, right? It protects us, or it seeks to protect us from feeling shame. So if we find ourselves feeling like we have to be perfect, I'm guilty of this. And
Raise your hand if you
feel
it.
And I use guilty for very intentionally. You know, that we really figure out, okay, you know, perfection is just not a real thing, and it's really an armor. It's an armor that we put on to avoid that vulnerability of I'm gonna make so many mistakes, and it's just inevitable in learning, right? Can I create the same learning environment for my horses or for my clients, for myself? One that's compassionate, one that says...
Well, we don't expect our horses to be perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I use the phrase a lot with my youth. I teach a youth program, and I tell them, you know, we talk about how we need to be as kind to ourselves as we are to our horses.
It's so hard to do.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do.
And, you know, you can take that at a surface layer, and yes, we need to be nice, but so much more than that, right? Yeah.
So Kristen Neff, she's a researcher. She's actually in the area. And her research is all on self-compassion, and she works closely with Brene Brown. And self-compassion is really hard to do because it kicks up things in us where we maybe didn't do that or didn't get that, right? And so there can be resistance to it being effective.
And I can definitely see how, because I'm like the ultimate like shield myself with perfection person. Don't give me that look. I know you know.
And we have a lot of compassion for you, because I do it too.
And it's been a journey to be okay with not being perfect.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the shield aspect, and it's so true because in my mind I'm like, well, nobody else is going to have compassion for me not being perfect, so I have to hold up to it because they're not gonna have compassion for it. So I'm just gonna have to like not have no slack for myself because they're not gonna be forgiving. It's like, so I'm gonna put myself in a very vulnerable situation. They may attack me or hate me or whatever, because I'm not perfect and I like make a mistake or whatever. Which in our horsemanship journey, I've started to recognize then that as soon as I'm in a situation where there's other people that I feel like are expecting me to be perfect or expecting me to showcase whatever, I put that on the horse. And what do you know? It all falls apart. They don't deal well with and what is it? Agendas. They don't deal well with agendas. So I, especially in group situations with like clinics and things like that, there's so many people and I don't know these people, so I feel super vulnerable. I feel very vulnerable, and I feel like I have to be perfect, and then the horse is doing what I didn't expect them to do, so they're not being perfect, which is making me not be perfect, which is like, now you're, you know, I don't feel safe. And anyway, and then I can easily go back to the horse, and
it can lead to a shame spiral. And then it goes back into, I've exposed myself in this way, and you know, then there's this feeling, this whatever your shame physiology, as we all have our own, you know, but shame is a physiological sensation. Then it goes back to that, and we can get really inward, right? We can want to, everyone has a different reaction to shame. We can want to hide, or we can want to, you know, maybe move towards people and get combative, or we move away, or we get people pleasing. You know, there's so many different things that we do, but the reality is that vulnerability is so brave. right? It's what leads us to compassion and joy and creativity, both of which you are doing, right, in spades, right? The bravery of coming out with a different way to engage, a kind way to engage with horses. And so when we expose ourselves, I think sometimes we have to get really clear on what feedback is important to us. And
we talked a lot about this.
And when you're on social media, it gets really hard. But I love what Brene Brown says about feedback, right? We have feedback from people who are also doing what you're doing, putting themselves out there, being vulnerable, trying. And then we get feedback from the cheap seats, from people that are not, walking in values that you share, or not being brave. And that feedback is not helpful.
And I think too, I think we need to guard against our imagination of what that feedback might be. So, I mean, Adele is the master of vulnerability, in my opinion, in terms of the size of your social media reach and the amount, that's immensely brave. The way that you put yourself out there, especially considering what you just acknowledged around struggling with perfectionism. And, but even, I mean, I see this in clients, even in one-on-one lessons. So there's no one else around, but they are paralyzed with their need for perfection and their need for the horse to be right so that they can be right. And that's only in front of one person who has completely got their back and created a safe space. So there's that, not only in, does it happen in these really large audiences, but also even in our own heads to ourselves. And
then like we were talking about the other day, where is that coming from? And a lot of times it might be coming from like being in a boarding facility and needing to prove that we can ride our horse, or the pressure of trying to keep up with that, me even, who's showcasing some more advanced behavior on social media. Like, my intention is never to make somebody feel guilty about what they're doing with their horse. But sometimes, I can't not show stuff, but I just thought it was really valuable, and we can talk more about this, where are those sources that are causing you to feel that way? Like, why are we not just enjoying that process and being there with the horse where they are right now? If you're enjoying what you're doing right now, what does it matter? Like, why are we worried about it being perfect?
And that can really take some introspection sometimes, I think, to identify the source. Like when I start feeling pressure or shame or frustration or anger or any of those kind of feelings, like, is that really coming from inside of me? Am I putting expectations on the horse? And if so, where are they really coming from? Are they coming from what I think that person over there who I've noticed is glancing over at me from the other side of the barn? And is that in fact even real? And does that even matter?
Absolutely. I can think of so many examples in my own life of, and this comes much more strongly for me with my dogs, because I've been on that journey with them for a little bit longer. But there's so much shame about past ways of engaging with them. And so I think I catch myself in moments of, oh my gosh, this trainer's coming over and I really need to be perfect and I need to show them everything that I've done. And in reality, it's so self-protective for me, because there's pain there from the past, right? Of what that process has been like, what that's looked like, and not working through completely, that shame, not having shame resilience around past things, which is an ongoing evolution.
I don't know. Like, how does, like, if you are worried you're going to be judged for posting this, or like people are being like, oh, she's not a good enough trainer, or somebody else might say, you're not taking care of your horse the best way that according to their mindset. Like, how does that play into that guilt, shame spiral?
I think it's huge. I think it's a really tough thing. And I think it's a different sensation and experience when you are talking about having a public forum where anyone can comment.
But people are going to feel it at their barns. Like, I mean, part of the reason, like we brought up before, is, they may not feel like they know a whole lot about clear training, but they're out in the middle of the arena, in front of an audience, because they're always right next to the barn.
This is my
Yes. And you're clicking and feeding your horse food, and everybody else is like, what is that crazy person doing? Right. And so you're worried about being judged.
Absolutely.
And then your horse makes a mistake. And then you start feeling guilty or shame or whatever it is. I don't know what, or just fearing the repercussions of what are going to happen from this. You know, I mean, it could go all the way up to, in some extreme cases, getting kicked out of your barn.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't know, how does that play in?
It's a really good question. So I can speak from my personal experience of just the feeling of extra pressure of needing to get it right, right? Or needing to prove that this is, this way of doing things is appropriate and safe and effective. So I can't speak to the logistics in terms of, there might be situations where it's just not a good fit, right? In terms of barn and horse and owner. But I have a list of values in the back of my mind that lead me in everything that I do. So for me, courage, compassion, kindness, and well-being. So I say, okay, am I walking the walk here? I am doing this because these are my values, right? And that's why I am risking, right? Well, that's why I am being vulnerable, putting myself out there, being brave, right? Having courage, because that is one of my values. Because I believe this is the kindest way that we can be with our horses. And I believe that it's worth the risk, right, of putting yourself out there, but it doesn't mean it's not hard. Yeah. And we will fall, right? And I think this work of shame resilience helps us figure out, how do we get back up from those falls, right? How do we, because when we put ourselves out there, it's inevitable, right? That's part of being brave.
Yeah. I think for me, and maybe because I'm just going to add in just what's helped me, is recognizing that as much as many of us are trying for that perfectionist state, there's no such thing as perfect.
Yes.
And everybody is trying to be perfect, but nobody's actually achieving perfection.
Yeah.
So it's okay that I didn't achieve perfection that time. And that may sound like, that's like a baby step, like recognizing that they may not achieve perfection all the time. And then, you work your way down to like, it's okay to be not perfect and all that. So, and working towards being perfect less often. That's something, it's taken years for me to just be like, it's okay that my house is a mess, or it's okay that my kids got upset at the grocery store, or it's okay that my horse nipped at my shoulder jacket right then, like in front of a bunch of people. Like my horse is not perfect. I'm not perfect. Things happen, and it's happening to everybody else too.
It's true. And you're not alone. And I think that's a really important thing to remember when you're feeling those things, is that you are in company, right, of other people that have experienced or are experiencing that.
And I mean, to me, that's a really important antidote to these feelings. It's not the one and only, but even if we are surrounded by people who are judging us, or that we fear are judging us, that we perceive are judging us, that we find our tribe, that we find our community and surround ourselves, and that may be virtual, absolutely. But it gives you, at the very least, even that scenario will give you peace that you're not the only one in the entire world. And there are actually lots of us out there, because I think that the obvious next step for many people, the unfortunate next step for many people in that scenario, is that they then get even more closed down, and they do it even more secretly because they don't want to be judged. Which means that the person just down the aisle of the barn who is also feeling that way, and they won't even know they exist, or the person in the same town as them, and they'll never find each other. My clients are always talking about how isolated they are, and then when they come along to a clinic and they're sitting looking around at 20 other people who are from the same geographic area, and they're like, I had no idea.
That was my experience at your clinic.
Beautiful. There was somebody 3 miles down the road from me, and I felt, even me, who has this huge social media, whatever, I'm like, there's somebody 3 minutes down the road that's interested in this. That's crazy to me. And I live in a really big city with lots of horse people and a big social media platform, but to me it still feels very much like everybody's like on the other side of the world. Like you're in New Zealand and I'm in Austin, Texas. So like, I mean, it still can feel that way. And so, but I feel like I've worked very hard, and you have 2 Bex, and Julia, you have a community too, where even if you are all the way on the other side of the world, this is a safe place for you to come and
and
share,
that is the
like,
good side of social media.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this is why I think social media can be a
Absolutely.
real positive thing in our lives if it's carefully managed.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I think you are talking about a really essential part of resilience to shame, which is community. And community provides empathy. And empathy is the biggest antidote to shame, right? Because shame is like mold, right? It likes secrecy, it likes darkness, it likes to kind of just like fester. It's that voice of, who do you think you are? Or there's no way you're doing this right? Those little gremlins. But when we find the tribe that you're talking about, we can say, I just had this feeling when I was out working at the barn and I felt like so-and-so was really giving me funny looks and this is what it brought up for me. And then you can have another person say, hey, I totally get that. And, I'm here, I'm just here to listen, or here's some advice if that's what you need, right? That's what we need. That's the key.
Yeah. Another thing that helped me was recognizing that I'm not the only one carrying the torch, kind of, so to speak. Like, I don't have to defend how I'm doing this. And I'm not this make or break, like I'm the only one out here and it's my job to convert everybody. And in my job, it really, really is, as far as like I train people to do things this way, but it's still not just on me. And then for my students, I want to strongly encourage them or share with them that they are learners, as we all are, but especially when you're in the beginning of a journey of a change, it's not your torch. Like everybody, it doesn't matter how you're training horses. It doesn't matter even if it's about training horses. It could be anything. When you're in the beginning stages of learning something, those people, if they're looking at you and expecting you to prove the best results that this training method can prove, they're looking at the wrong source. And not that you can't be a really good beacon and start those ripples and those changes, but it's okay to be learning. It's okay to be still figuring out how to do things.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm still figuring out.
Yes.
We all are. I feel so like I'm like way in the beginning of this very long journey that we will never complete.
And that we can own this and not apologize for it. I see a lot of particularly the younger people in the community on social media apologizing constantly.
That they don't do it quite right, or that they don't know as much, or
sorry about my rubbish writing, or so, or that culture of apologizing for who I am. We can own the fact that we're not perfect without apologizing to the world.
It's
even
there's
sometimes
a lot of
strength in that.
And sometimes it's really passive, like as far as it's subtly put in there, like, or I have some very obvious ones, which I have done before. It's like, disclaimer, like I didn't brush my horse today or whatever. Like, why am I apologizing for that? Like my horse is well taken care of and he's loved and I'm doing the best I can. And
yes, you are. And we all are. And I think that's the phrase we really want to come back to. And I encourage all of us, including myself, to really have empathy and compassion for ourselves and for other people on this learning journey, but also to have compassion and empathy for the people in our barns that are doing things really, really differently, right? Because that is how change happens, right? We don't change people by shaming them. We change them. I think you said this actually in your clinic. We change them by just modeling, being examples.
Yeah, we change the world through our example, not our opinion. I'm not actually sure I can't recall where that quote came from, but I use it a lot. Because it just, I feel really strongly about that. I think we need to just go out there and shine the light and you be you and just do your thing and do what feels good in your gut. And what your horse is telling you feels good for him.
And I think that will really help people not to get stuck in this. I have this information in my head, but if I try and go out and do it, I know it won't be perfect. So I'm not going to do it.
No, girl, this is me.
And it happens to me too. I'm like, even in shaping things, like Bex, I've watched your videos of you shaping these long chains of stuff. And I recognize that's a learning, like I still need to work on my learning process there, right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what I haven't done is gone out and actually practiced doing it. Like I'm really, really good at like the practical stuff, like shorter chains or whatever. And the idea of just going out and like we were doing at the clinic, teaching her how to pick a hat up and put it on somebody's head. Like my brain goes, holy smokes, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get it right. I'm probably going to mess it up. So I just never do it. I just never do it.
And I'm the same. I've done the same.
Yeah.
So there's an area of horsemanship that I'm dying to know more about, and that I know would help my horses is more of the biomechanics and the classical dressage in-hand stuff.
Yeah.
I've been talking about this for well over a year, just what I haven't done yet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You get paralyzed by the unknown and thinking, knowing that you will mess it up. Like recognizing that we are going to be the learner and we are going to be novices at it is frightening.
I think for me too, just to add another layer to that, something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about is am I making excuses or am I making choices? So the reality is that although I've been talking about wanting to learn that new skill set and learn how to do that, it is going to take some time and it is going to take some study. And those of my friends who do a lot of it are people that have spent a lot of time training. Like I know, you've spent a lot of time learning how to do that stuff. And the reality is in the last couple of years, that hasn't actually been an option. And that's okay.
Yeah. Recognizing when something is a priority and when you're choosing to not make something a priority for right now.
I don't have the bandwidth to learn that right now. But I want to make sure that the reason I'm saying that is truly because I don't and not because I'm afraid of failing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the difference there, like recognizing and making sure it's that difference, is one is going to get you stuck and you will idle out. You're just going to be in this one place forever. And the other one is just saying, not right this second, but I'm going to come back to that, right? Yeah. Or that is a goal of mine. And I will, I'll say, I know I don't have the bandwidth for this specific thing right now. I have a couple things on my mind I'm thinking of. So I will slot out like spring 2021 is when I'm going to start this project. And I have a deadline of this is when I'm going to create the bandwidth, because that's the other thing is people who are short on time, you have to intentionally clear space to make space for this new information and that learning process, which does take effort, time, vulnerability.
Oh my gosh. I totally connect with that because I'm new at this with horses. I'm new with positive reinforcement with horses. I've spent a lifetime with dressage and jumping and hunters and all traditionally trained. And this is I bought a filly about a year ago, and I'm like, all right, here we go. But I find and we were joking about this at the clinic that I'm like, it's really hard for me to record. Is it hard for me to record because it's hard for me to record, or am I afraid of the feedback on this? Exactly. Right? And recognizing in me, and I know this is part of my work, as it is, I think all of our work, is that we can be imperfect, right? And sometimes I actually make that an intention. Today, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be imperfect, and that is my goal. And I can't mess that up.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great intention.
That is actually, it's really, I hadn't labeled one of the steps that I've been taking to, I don't want to imply that perfectionism is like this fault, but it can handicap us.
It could totally do
that.
Yeah.
So if we allow it to.
Right.
And so for me, trying to balance that out.
Yes.
I will have, there's been times, I'm trying to imagine an example, but, when we were organizing the clinic, there were times where, lots of questions are coming at me, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to set up this? And then in my mind, I'm like, I know what I want it to look like. I know what perfect world looks like. And so I stop and I have this intentional little internal dialogue where I'm like, where's my priority at? My priority is at enjoying this experience. And it's okay if it's not like Pinterest perfect. Right. And, I love Pinterest, so I'm not implying Pinterest is bad.
Great. I love Pinterest too.
It's a perfectionist heaven. But I choose and I prioritize the more important thing, because at the end of the day, when I go home, which am I going to have enjoyed more and which is going to have filled me up more and been more reinforcing? Getting to sit and listen to you talk, or having made sure I recorded every little thing you said and set up all the cameras and made sure the lights were just right and there's flowers here and this dish was perfectly done and all that. Like, at the end of the day, longevity, like what's going to feed me long term, is going to be having enjoyed that experience with you. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the step that I took to help.
That's fantastic.
I acknowledged that at the time internally and appreciated it, because, you know, that actually nourishes me as well, to have you there with me and for us to be able to share thoughts afterwards and that kind of thing. And you did that very, very well.
Thank you. I tried very hard.
Yeah. And I enjoyed the outcome of the clinic. So
So
I
that's
was
good.
not behind the scenes, but it was lovely. Yes, absolutely. I would love to hear about recent examples of things that came up for either one of you.
Like an example where I felt guilt, or an example of where I had to intentionally choose to be vulnerable in that I knew it wasn't perfect. Or
I think an example of maybe something that felt, you know, quick or time pressured, where there wasn't so much of a conscious choice, where you acted and then after the fact something came up for you,
whether an action that we did that maybe we look back on, we're like, that wasn't quite what I wanted.
Yes.
I have one from relatively recently with my own horse, where there was various pressures and I was trying to get him on the trailer. And after the fact, I felt, I'm going to say, guilt, possibly shame. I don't know. Yeah. I remember feeling like, I remember labeling myself with hypocritical. That word came up in my head, where I, you know, I did things, I responded in ways that I wasn't proud of, or that I regretted.
Sure.
And
we're not talking about anything particularly dramatic, but
no, I mean, I've had the similar situations, especially because we're referring to the trailer. I mean, I've had the situation with my filly when she was much younger, and I was super proud of the fact that she would load into the trailer anytime. Like, I just opened the door and she'd get right in, right? But we had gone to back-to-back vet exams. Yeah. And she was done. She was so done. But I had to get her home. She couldn't stay 5 hours away from home. Yeah. And it wasn't crazy. It wasn't dramatic. I just applied some pressure and release. And because we were done with the food, we were done with all the stuff. And we could go on about, like, you know, how to make that better, all this stuff. But I didn't talk about it for a long time because I felt very hypocritical. Like, I just had to do this thing to my horse, and I felt bad about it. But now I look back and I'm like, that's just, you know, that stuff kind of, like, it happens and it's okay, and I can do better next time. But, but it was very hard for me at the time.
Oh yeah. I have those examples too, with my horse and with my dogs, and with the people in my life.
Well,
right?
With my kids.
Lose your rag with your kid.
Yes. And it happens because we are not perfect. We can't always be regulated, right? And I think that, you know, when we start labeling ourselves, well, I did this thing, so I must be a hypocrite. I did this thing, so I must not be a good trainer. I did this thing, I must be a terrible therapist. Whatever it is, right? That is the shame, right? And so when we practice shame resilience, there's 4 steps. We start to get really good, one, at identifying, like, what does shame look like in our bodies, or how does it feel? Some people are like, oh, I have this thing in my chest, or I have this thing in my stomach, or my vision starts to get wonky, or whatever. So we recognize the physiology of shame first. And then along with that, we recognize what the triggers are for shame. So we all have shame triggers. And one way we can tell what our shame triggers are is by thinking about, this is not a fun exercise, but I encourage everyone to do it, but thinking about what's the worst thing you could be perceived as. We think about judgment coming in from others.
That's hard.
Exercise. Right? Yeah, we don't need to do it right now, but just to get your juices flowing, right? What's the worst thing you could be perceived as? And oftentimes, and we can go to the other end of the spectrum and say, how do we want to be perceived? What's the ideal, right? The perfect, which is not possible, but that's often the areas where we overcompensate in. So when we find out what are the worst things, right, of how we are perceived, we can recognize, oh, that's probably a shame trigger for me, right? If I am concerned about someone thinking that I'm not smart, for example, that might be a shame trigger for me, and that might mean I need to overcompensate by, doing all this stuff, which I do, right? I take lots of classes. So for me, I recognize, okay, being perceived in a particular way as smart, or not being perceived that way is something that triggers me. So recognizing your shame triggers, recognizing, okay, is it when I get frustrated with my horse in this particular situation? Is it when someone else is watching and they see me do this? Is it when I'm alone and I do this? What am I doing, right? Is it pressure and release? Is it something else? But we have to figure out what sparks or what moves those physiological reactions. So that's the very first piece of shame resilience. So I practice this when I work with my horse, right? And I leave the barn and I'm like, ooh, like I'm feeling really, what is that? Then we start to practice critical awareness. Why would we feel shame, right? Why would we feel shame about this particular thing? What does our society tell us about women and smartness? That's my example. Or positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement versus punishment. What have I done in the past along those continuums, right? So practicing that critical awareness is really important. So those are the first two steps. And then the next step is reaching out. So this is where the tribe comes in, right? Just finding a way to reach out and to be able to practice communicating with others. So shame, like I said, is like a mold.
And I'm sharing it. Yeah.
Right. So we need empathy, right? So empathy is the best antidote to shame. So if you feel this thing, normally if we're like, I'm such a hypocrite, it's like, well, I'm not going to tell anybody that, it's our go-to. But really we want that to come out so we can realize, actually, no, like you are walking in your values and you're human. And sometimes we make mistakes, right? Sometimes we need an outside source to remind us.
So would you put any, I'm assuming that the answer will be yes, would you put any caveats on that in terms of which particular sunbeam you choose to expose your...
Yes, it is so important. I'm so glad you asked. When we're vulnerable like this, we need to share our story with people that have earned the right to hear it. And people that have not earned the right to hear it are people that may shame us for that experience.
So we're not saying jump on Instagram.
That's right. Please don't do that.
Send it out to the universe and open yourself up for more judgments, which will then cause mold to...
Yes. So talk to your best friend, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, talk to your trainer that you've built years of trust with, right? Find the people that can hold you with empathy and compassion. And the last piece is naming shame. So, and I am getting better at this. In my work life, this comes up a lot. If I miss something, or if I'm late, or if I make a mistake, I will say, oh wow, I was really in a shame spiral right then. Right? I'll just say it. I'll give voice to it. And I'm lucky that the people I've surrounded myself with are like, totally get that. Right? So 4 components to shame resilience. You can practice them anytime, anywhere. They can fit with you in your back pocket. So.
And is there a particular book, for example, Brené Brown?
Yeah,
she's got multiple books. Is there a particular resource that people should be referring to?
That's such a good question. I recommend all of her books.
Yeah.
They are fantastic. If you're not somebody who wants to dive into a book, you can YouTube her.
She's got a Netflix show also.
She has got a Netflix show. Yeah, absolutely. Kristen Neff, who I mentioned before, she has a website where you can take a self-compassion quiz.
Oh,
and she's got tons of meditations on there. I personally love that. So that's where I would start.
Okay.
Be kind to yourself.
What do you feel, or at least for me, something that's helped is with my horsemanship, and this goes along with the perfectionism and the feeling judged and all of that. One way I can protect myself a little bit and feel more confident in practicing something out and exposed and not trying to hide away and stuff or feeling shame even, or guilt over my horse doing something against what I thought they would do, or not against, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Different than I thought, different than I expected, is not basing my identity on my horse's actions, or even on, I mean, if we're going to go even deeper, the results of my training. Like the results of my training are not necessarily my identity. Yeah. And I feel like that has really helped me feel more confident and a little bit more, I don't even know what, but less likely to feel that shame spiral. Yeah. Because yes, my horse didn't get in the trailer. That's not me. Yeah. Like, I mean, sure, I can make changes. I can actively work towards making this a better situation. Right. And I'm not, and maybe I did or did not prepare her enough or so on. Yeah. But it's not like the end all be all of who I am. That's right. It's not my identity. Yeah. And so I feel like that kind of fits in. Oh my gosh. To everything we were talking about.
It's so important. And I can think about that as parents, as partners, as friends, right? Absolutely. I mean, it is, you know, I think that when we identify what our core values are and we try hard to walk in those daily, sometimes we don't. Right. And because we're human, but I think that our identity is tied to what we do to try. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we're all gonna make mistakes because none of us are robots.
Yes.
So, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah. Yeah. Very bland world.
Yeah, I know, right? Robots. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, this has been super awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys all for
this was such a treat.
Traveling here to my little home and talking. And how can people reach you if they want to get more information? And or do you want them to?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking.
Maybe don't.
So I don't have a really big presence on social media. So emailing me is the best way. And I imagine you can like put an email link. Okay, perfect.
In your website maybe.
Yeah, and my website. Yeah, that would be lovely. Okay, yeah. And I would love to hear from people who want to chat.
Absolutely. And we'll put our own information. Obviously, this will be included in our stuff. But so it was awesome.
So exciting.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
We covered a bit of everything. That was perfect.
I know. It was really fun.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, I would love if you left us a review on wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more, head to our website, thewillingequine.com, where you'll find a bunch of links to our different social media platforms. We have Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, pretty much everything. We also have our blog, our training services, and the TWE Academy, where you can enroll in the foundation course that opens a few times a year. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.